Let's see if I can figure out how to advance this. All right. So just overview, this is what we do. Our job is to kind of promote efficient use of the spectrum. We're trying to ensure fair access to spectrum and minimize interference. Most of that job is paperwork and a little bit of arbitration between users. We publish the repeater listings. We have, I would say, inarguably the most accurate repeater listings than any online or crowdsourced thing. So, and of course, our site is updated nightly in multiple versions, so you can easily suck it into whatever application you use to program your radio. And oops, I have ORC in here. Sorry, that was supposed to go away. And then we also publish the local VHF, UHF band plans. You can find all that stuff on our website on 2 meters and 70 centimeters, which are the targets that we're going to look at here for narrowbanding. We've actually broken it into both wide and narrowband channels, so you can see what the channel raster looks like as both the current wide system and future narrow system. Well, this is annoying the way this works. So band plans, we have the list of band plans. So hopefully this should be the right one. Anyway, you can find them both for Oregon, Western Washington, the Inland Empire for Eastern Washington and BC. So these are the groups that we coordinate with. Not so much Eastern Washington. The Cascades provide a nice barrier for us, but obviously Oregon and British Columbia we have to deal with fairly frequently. Here's a typical process. Potential repeater owner chooses a repeater pair and applies for coordination. They put that equipment on the air. They have a test period of 3 to 6 months with it all on the air in its final configuration. If we don't hear any complaints, that coordination request is processed, and then we publish it publicly to make sure that everyone gets to see it before it gets coordinated and make a final comment. And then if we don't have any issues or no one contests it, then we go ahead and issue the coordination, and that renewal period is 5 years. That becomes important here shortly. Here's a little timeline of the repeaters. The 1950s, we had AM repeaters. In the 70s, there was a shift to analog FM repeaters. There's somewhere in there that I've not been able to find a date for. The original channel allocations were 25 kilohertz. That was the default for FM repeaters for both commercial and amateur radio. At some point in 2 meters, because the spectrum ran out, WWARA in the late 70s, early 80s is my impression. I can't identify exactly when, shifted the 2 meter band plan to a 20 kilohertz spacing, which was kind of a brilliant move at the time. It required obviously a lot of coordination and cooperation from repeater owners, but is causing us some headaches now because we have this really weird transition period now to go to narrowband. It's not an issue on 70 centimeters where they were left at 25 kilohertz spacing. I've got a little diagram to show this as well. 1989, Project 25 started. That's kind of the federal digital solution. 2005, ICOM introduced the first D-Star systems. In 2007, we saw DMR. In 2013, the FCC actually required that all commercial stations, so basically anybody, almost everybody below 512 megahertz had to shift to narrowband, so 12.5 kilohertz spacing. That exempted amateur radio and marine, for example. There are a few places that didn't have to do this, but everyone else had to shift to this 12.5 kilohertz spacing to ease the congestion that they had as well. We have not done this, and therefore we are in this same position that the commercial guys were some time ago. And then also in 2013, Yaesu announced their System Fusion digital system. So I want to set some definitions because there's some other terminology that's used out there. This is the terminology that the FCC uses, and so that's what we've adopted. Wideband analog or wideband analog FM generally is 20 to 25 kilohertz channel spacing. Uses a 5 kilohertz deviation, which yields a 16 kilohertz wide occupied bandwidth. Technically, assuming everything's all right, you haven't over-deviated, blah, blah, blah. And the emission mask for this, the FCC emission mask, you can see there is 16K0 F3E. So that's 16 kilohertz wide. F3E is FM voice. And for narrowband, analog FM, we want to move to a 12.5 kilohertz channel spacing. So you can do this with FM just by changing the deviation down to 2.5 kilohertz deviation. And then it becomes, the emission mask for this is 11K2 F3E, which means the occupied bandwidth, again, calculated, not necessarily real world, which is why there's some extra space in there, some guard space, is 11K2, so 11.5 kilohertz wide F3E, FM voice. And for narrowband digital, I am not going to do these, but I can tell you the first few digits there are the occupied bandwidth. So P25 is that 9K80D7W, horrible, ugly thing. There's System Fusion and DMR, for example. These are all, you can see their occupied bandwidths are generally a little over 9K, around the DMR is 7K kilohertz. And then this is generally the channel spacing commercially as well is still 12.5 kilohertz. And then the FCC at some point wants to move to this, what they call phase 2, which is ultra narrowband or 6.25 kilohertz channel spacing. There are a few systems already that implement this, NXDN, D-Star, I'm in the way here somewhere, there it is. ACSSB is analog, that's the analog compandered single sideband. Also complies with that ultra narrow band. Anyway, so those are the systems that we're looking at currently that are out there.
So Scott, sorry to interrupt.
Sure, go ahead.
So as I also understand it, the FCC is also willing to accept ultra narrow band comparables. So
correct. Good
those
point.
that are TDMA in the narrow band space, right?
Correct. So P25 and DMR, because they're time sliced or can be time sliced in the case of P25, where you can fit two time slices, two slots in that 12.5. They accept that as their ultra narrowband phase 2 compatible system, which I'm hoping we don't have to deal with, or I'll be gone, whatever. Somebody else will have to deal with it. But obviously in the short term, we're only dealing with the narrowband. So what that does mean, though, is that obviously some of these ultra narrowband systems are going to become more common because there is a push by the FCC to start moving that direction as well. We're still catching up with our last move. So thanks. That was Jamie, right?
Yes, sir.
Thanks, Jamie. All right. So I mentioned 70 centimeters is easy because we left it at 25 kilohertz channel spacing. So today we've been issuing, up to this, well, I guess we've already issued a few narrowband ones, but we approved a narrowband plan for 70 centimeters, which is pretty basic because 12.5 is half of 25. So it's super easy to just add another, every time somebody converts one of those wideband channels to narrow, we end up with a spare narrowband channel. We get 100% recovery of a new channel. So that's fantastic. And very well, easy on paper. Again, not easy for Rob because he's grinding his teeth back there. I can hear it. It's not at all easy for Rob to manage wide and narrow systems in the same spectrum. And then we also have to coordinate with adjacent users, BC and Oregon. Their band plans are going to look different. So that's going to be a little more of a headache for us. But we get a lot of extra spectrum this way, or kind of extra spectrum. 2 meters is a little more complicated because it already has 20 kilohertz wide channels that doesn't divide. The 12.5 kilohertz doesn't divide evenly into the 20 kilohertz. So the problem we have there is to come up with a way to. Some people get to stay. I think it was 1 in 5 people can stay where they are, but the other 4 have to slide slightly to adjust to that new channel raster. So this is not the entire spectrum. It's just a little slice to give you some idea of how the new narrowband spectrum maps to the older wide channels. And I think I was going to see if I can find one here that lines up properly. Yeah, 146/700, for example, doesn't change. 145.15, that doesn't change. But you can see the other users need to slide a little bit. The nice thing here is that for every 2 adjacent wideband users we convert to narrowband, we get a third channel out of that. So moving 2 users to narrow gets us a third channel. So this was my being clever here. Narrowbanding saves lives. There hasn't been an open 2 meter pair for over a decade. They do come up occasionally. They don't last very long. Um, and so really the best way for quite a while to get a 2 meter pair is to bump off an existing owner. Just take out a hit order on them and take them out of the picture, and then you can take over the pair. But even on 70 centimeters for the very first time in 2018, again, because of all this new digital activity, most of the new digital systems are being coordinated on UHF, and there will only ever be more of them. It's not like any of these systems are going to go, DMR isn't going away anytime soon, and D-Star isn't going away, and Fusion's like still adding systems. So, and M17 and other digital modes are in the wings, and we're going to start seeing these things as well, right? So there needs to be a place for these people to actually get on the air and make things happen. So again, I mentioned the commercial world has already shifted to narrowband in 2013. There's multiple digital solutions already in use for repeaters. Those systems, what's cool about the digital stuff right now is that they're inherently narrowband. So on 2 meters, for example, the systems that we've coordinated on 2 meters that are narrowband, or that are digital, are narrowband, and we're wasting spectrum because they're sitting in a wideband channel. We have no way to put them in a smaller slot unless people start moving. And of course, there have only ever been more repeater coordinations requested as these new digital systems come online, as people start hooking up more linked systems, whatever else. Yeah, we can see here the digital repeaters have increased 77% since 2013. And admittedly, hams want more repeaters. That's totally fair. And most of these are narrowband digital systems, which again that's fantastic because that's something we can accommodate, obviously with a little bit of effort here. So we've been working on this plan now since 2019 when we first made the plan public. We worked on some alternate solutions. And the one we have today, what you saw with that channel raster, is the most reasonable one. It's supported by current radios, supported by most repeaters. It's not certainly all current repeaters. In fact, all current repeaters really only support that. So it's nice to be able to kind of socialize this. We've been working on that. We've done presentations at more than a dozen clubs. If you saw the narrowband page on the WWARA website, Kenny has done a bunch of presentations at various clubs. I've done a couple at CPAC to make sure that people are aware that this plan is out there and we'd like to move this direction to free up some spectrum. And it provides a plan for those 12.5 kilohertz channels at 2 meters and 70 centimeters. The 2 meter pairs increased by 50%, and at 70 centimeters, the pairs increased by 100%. We can actually double the number of repeaters on the air, and the slots for repeaters. Currently, this is as of I don't know, yesterday, last couple of days anyway. 13% of 2 meters and 22% of 70 centimeters are already narrowband. And of the new systems that we've coordinated since the beginning of the year, 70% of those new systems are narrowband digital. Oop, I think I went too far. So, a couple other points to make here. This provides space for more repeater pairs for these new modes, and there will be more new modes, right? This is not going away. And none of the existing modes, they might fall out of favor and maybe a few of these systems go off the air, but there's going to be way more new systems that come online. Oh, actually, sorry. Rob has a question. Rob?
Not so much a question, just another point to make on the whole wide versus narrow. We have bought time for quite some time by co-channeling systems. And the short version of that is we're even running out of co-channel space. It's not just the fact that there's a repeater on every frequency. We try to do north sound, south sound, and even center sound wherever we can, and that terrain and everything else allows. And we're at the point where we're going to have to simply start saying we can't do it because we don't have frequency. So that's another push behind this that doesn't really make it into, it's hard to illustrate, I guess is probably the cleanest way to say it.
Yeah,
Just to
thanks.
add to what Rob
Oh.
said, I've run this analysis before, and I'm doing this from memory now, but something like 70% of the 2-meter pairs have at least 2 systems on each channel. And there's a bunch of them that have 3, where we've been able to because of geographical isolation. That other 30% have extremely wide coverage, and it's impossible to co-channel because they basically cover most of Western Washington. But it is a very tightly packed 2-meter space.
And this is going to be a problem for us when we go to narrowband, because it also means that potentially all the co-channel users have to move at the same time, or anyway, that's going to be another complication for us, obviously. But yeah, so again, all current digital voice modes are narrowband. Most of the new, as I mentioned, most of the new requests for digital voice are for digital voice systems. So 70% of our new applications in 2024 are for narrowband systems. Those are currently kind of wasting wide space with narrow modes. We could, if we could just squeeze them in some fashion, that would be nice. But there's no place to put them without somebody's got to move. That's the bottom line is. And the most logical thing we came up with is just have a plan to transition people, motivate people to narrowband up, and then we can migrate them. So it is supported in all commercial gear since 1997. So you can, there's no reason, there's no issues finding hardware for this. We checked commercial, ham radios, and I think with I think we identified 2 exceptions of radios that don't properly support narrowband that were manufactured since 2000. And even before that, obviously, but in the commercial realm, the FCC mandated that all commercial gear in 1997 be narrowband compatible, and ham gear followed pretty much at the same time frame, with the exception of a couple of radios. There was no deal, no issue. Let's see here. And in fact, yeah, again, since 2013, you had to, if you wanted to have like a repeater, for example, that supported wideband, you actually have to sell it specifically to the amateur market. If it's a commercial repeater, it has to be narrowband only. So I know, well, people have told me that if you send a Motorola repeater in for repair, it'll come back narrowband only. They'll fix it for you and make it narrowband, because that's all they're allowed to have. So, and generally, one of the convenient things, of course, is that if you have a modern repeater, you really don't have to change anything except reprogramming it and updating your duplexers. There's no hardware change required. You don't have to swap anything out. If you have an older repeater that can't support narrowband, then obviously the repeater itself has to change, but none of the rest of this stuff no antennas don't care, feed lines don't care, entrance panels, duplexers, all the rest of that hardware that does not care. So you can, it's not too difficult to pick up, a pretty good deal on a modern enough repeater to get you to narrowband.
I have a comment about the amateur radios.
I can't, is that Dana? Is that you? You're pretty garbled.
My voice garbled?
Oh, or Bruce?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I have a comment about the amateur radios. On paper, that looks good, but I think the real issue is how many operators will be operating wideband with user radios. I think that's quite a few.
It is an issue. Well, I say this. So the units themselves, again, anything with the exception of 2 radios that we've identified, anything manufactured since 2000 can do narrowband. Getting people to program their radios properly, is that the issue you're concerned about? Because that's the issue we're concerned
also
about.
the radios they have in their hands, not what's available for how many people are going to be operating narrowband versus wideband.
I didn't quite catch that.
Hey, Bruce, please talk slower or put your microphone next to your mouth with intent.
I don't know if I have that issue. I think I have an issue with with my internet connection. I'm just curious how many people are going to actually be able to operate narrowband. Seems like there'd be that'll be the biggest issue, is getting users to operate narrowband.
You mean programming their radios properly?
No, how many people who have radios and those radios actually operate narrowband? A lot of radios out there, not what's been purchased since 2000, but what people have in their hands are wideband only.
I would contest that, because again, we're talking about in the last 25 years, everything, again, with the exception of 2 radios, can do narrowband.
Yeah, I have D700 Kenwoods, no narrowband. I've used
Pardon?
those for many years.
The Kenwood D700 is one of them.
Yes, and that's a very popular radio.
There is no doubt that there is equipment that exists that people still use that will continue to be a problem. However, we do have many systems that are already narrowbanding in both bands, and those people that use those systems have made the transition. We've not literally, from a 2 meter 70 centimeter standpoint, I've not heard from anyone that there's been an issue, people regretting that they've gone to narrowband. Their users have been able to make that change. Will it be perfect for everyone? Will everyone not need to buy a new radio? No, it's still going to be an issue out there. You can still operate a FT 901 on AM if you want, but you know they exist. There's no doubt about that. But yeah, there'll need to be hopefully little equipment, given that narrowband has been out there for so long and people have been doing it for several years now.
One other thing, just to add, Scott hasn't gotten to the slide yet, but remember that we're talking about starting the process today, not that it'll be complete. So this is the thing that's difficult, people, I know myself included, that you think, well, what's going to happen today? Well, Scott's going to talk about a timeline that actually goes out another decade. And so think about the fact, will you still be using that D700 10 more years from now? Maybe. I mean, it'll be a 40-plus-year-old radio at that point. I know my personal one's starting to fail, so which annoys me greatly because I love the radio, but you know, these things don't have a life expectancy of forever.
The Yaesu FT90 is another one that isn't compatible, and mine died here a couple years ago, so I'm good. I'm golden.
Can I add a comment?
Yeah.
I've been a ham a long time, and I remember the transition from AM repeaters to FM repeaters. So, you know, guys, at some point, your old equipment's got to be retired. My original old homebrew CW transmitter, I haven't used it in 50 years. So, you know, we got to go. I'm more curious about, okay, are we going to take, you know, how are we going to go about it? Are we going to take the top, you know, 1 megahertz and move it, and then the next mega, or how are you going to actually migrate the users from one frequency to another? So I'm anxious to hear that part, Scott. Thanks.
Yeah, that's coming up. Thank you. So I think some of these things are on here. A couple of the things that we have to contend with, obviously, is narrowband systems are going to have to be narrow on the output regardless of the input. It's tied into the second bullet, which is training users how to program narrow FM. If they're transmitting wideband FM into a narrowband system, it has to be narrow on the output, otherwise it'll interfere with adjacent channels. So we have to enforce the systems have to enforce that.
I couldn't find you guys. Okay.
There is a potential loss of range on high altitude systems in Washington State. One of the, you know, the good news, bad news is most of our systems are terrain limited. So they're you can only get as far as the next lump of dirt. So the actual loss of range, the open, kind of open field loss of range is not going to be noticeable in most cases, except for a few really high sites. And then, of course, comes into this coordinating moves of adjacent systems. That's going to be a complication because there's kind of a two-step process that we envision. And then we're also going to have to deal with the changes with adjacent regions because we haven't, we've talked to both BC and Oregon. You saw a comment here about Oregon, or a couple in here. I presented this at CPAC to kind of see what they're thinking. And they are not nearly as densely populated as we are across the state. And they have no particular reason or interest in migrating to narrowband. So we're going to have to deal with some incompatible incompatible band plans as we move forward. So here's kind of what we have been discussing, and the kind of the most, I think, efficient, reasonable timeframes for these things. So our plan was we had to create the new band plans so that you could actually see the rasters and make it all work out. There's still a couple weird cases that we have to decide on, but the new band plan for 2 meters has been published this year, and for 70 centimeters, it was published a couple years ago. So the new band plan is out there. It's on the website. You can see how everything lines up, and it allows for us to allocate narrowband pairs. We had to have a band plan in order for us to actually find a place for these narrowband folks to go. The goal here is that by 2025, so end of this year, basically, will be the last time we accept wideband applications. So all new systems going forward will have to be narrowband. So existing wideband systems can be renewed, but we won't be accepting any new applications for wideband systems. So we can start plugging people in the narrowband holes, as they become available. And then in 2030, we'll stop accepting renewals for wideband. So I'm anticipating December 30th of 2029, there'll be a flurry of renewals because you can renew at any point, which means that that basically buys people up until 2035 to actually completely migrate to narrowband. Galaxy Tab E has a question. I have no idea who that is.
Whoever, go for it.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. My question is, this, just like every other idea, it will evolve over time. But many of us are computer challenged. Many of us do not have software ability. And as you move this towards 6.25 kilohertz, field programmable radios will no longer be able to be done by keypad. Everything's going to have to be computer. How are you going to do that kind of thing in a power out SHTF type of situation if we're going to play this game?
So we're not going to 6.25. I don't expect that to happen in my lifetime. So that's somebody else's problem. What we're talking about is 12.5, and 12.5, if you have a field programmable radio, can be done today on every radio. We specifically chose this band plan because it's compatible with the steps are compatible with every radio. The narrowband piece, there's a few radios that can't do that.
If it's analog, yes. If it's digital, you can't do that.
DMR, I don't know that DMR can be field programmed. That's certainly complicated. But again, we don't have any mode is really not relevant to us. We're just looking at channel slots. So if a bunch of people choose a DMR to be their future, to be their mode of choice, then that's what their users choose. You can certainly do FM analog. I don't expect it to go anywhere. FM analog narrowband will continue to be the thing.
Many of the DMR capable radios are field programmable in DMR mode. Commercial ones are not. that's by design.
Right, right. I was gonna say the D-Star radios are really easy. Literally, you pick the nearest repeater off the list. So on an ICOM radio, so it's in fact it's easier than an FM rig. So um, I don't know. Yeah, there's as far as programmability, the programmability of these channels doesn't change just because we go to narrowband.
And just to be clear, we're not talking about a move to digital. We're talking about a move to a narrowband channel slot.
That we
Yes.
don't care what you want to put in it.
I understand the narrow band, but right now, the amount of views that amateur repeaters are getting is very minimal. Now, opening up more pairs, do you really think that we're going to have a whole lot more traffic by opening up more channels?
Well, I don't know that we're going to get more traffic, but I think what you're seeing is, especially if you're an FM user, you've seen lots of repeaters go, significantly quieter because those communities have moved on to other digital modes where you can't hear them. I think what we've done is kind of, whatever, as a community, people have chosen their mode of choice and they tend to hang out there. So we don't, like when you're listening, scanning across the band, you don't necessarily hear as much traffic. That doesn't mean it's not there, and we don't have any good way to measure it. I've always tried to figure that out to see if, because I certainly remember, when I was first licensed, there was way more activity on the repeaters, but there were also fewer repeaters and they were all FM, so I could hear everybody. And that's not true anymore. So I don't know. They do seem quieter for sure, but I don't know that there's actually less traffic.
Well, I've listened to DMR for years. I've listened to analog for years. I've watched a steady decline, especially since COVID, over all the systems. So our utilization of what we have is waning. I don't know how narrowbanding and taking this to more channels and more repeater systems is going to solve that problem.
Well, I guess I'm not clear that that's an actual, there's two issues here. One, like having less usage on any one repeater, I don't know that that's a problem. And number two, we are getting more applications for repeaters. So how people are using those repeaters, that is really not for us to judge. When people sometimes, will occasionally get this whole justification letter about how it's being used for emergency communications, blah, blah, blah. We don't judge the utility of the repeater, just that they want a space. And anybody can apply for a repeater. We don't care. And we can't care. We're not judging the viability of it and the user base. And if it turns out 3 people use that repeater, that's up to them to maybe think about if that's an appropriate use of our spectrum. But you don't want us to judge that. We just try to accommodate everybody that asks. Does that make sense?
Let's go with. All right, I'm done.
All right, thank you. Doug, did you still have something? Your hand's up. Is that no?
No, I'm fine.
All right, Larry? Larry, I see your hand up. I don't know if that's a thing or not. Maybe not.
Oh, I had to unmute. Yeah, I had to unmute. That helps. I was just going to mention, it's maybe it's neither here nor there, but FYI, I suppose you guys know, but ICOM has discontinued their D-Star repeaters. They came out with a new model not long ago, a few years ago, and it integrated everything, and you can plug in a 5G card, and you got the internet in there automatically. Very nice, but they eliminated it, and so I don't know how much, as far as D-Star goes, not sure how much growth that we're going to see there when there's no repeaters available except for the old ones. Who knows how long those will last? So just an FYI thing.
Yeah, they've also commented that they weren't selling them, so they just discontinued them. They are available on eBay. Obviously, you can buy both older and newer ones on eBay, and they did say that they would put them back into production if they felt there was an actual market for them. So they're kind of discontinued on paper.
Right. But I was saying, it's kind of dovetails that last comment about usage. I mean, all things being equal, if they stop selling them, kind of gives you a pointer as to usage.
Well, we're talking about building out infrastructure, though. I mean, the D-Star is the oldest of all of these modes. That infrastructure is pretty well built out at this point because it's 20 years old. So I think we're going to see I don't expect we're going to see a lot of new D-Star systems, that's for sure, but there are plenty already on the air, and we are going to see newer modes. This like M17, for example, is coming, and people are going to start building repeaters for that. It'll be interesting to see when we get our first application for an M17 repeater. That's a new digital mode, and again, people aren't going to stop making digital modes, and it will continue to fragment. As you know, I guess I don't know who that was, Galaxy Tab E. As that was commented, it'll continue to kind of fragment the user community, but as long as people keep asking for things, we want to be in a position to be able to respond.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, I think, the other thing that's working against usage is what's going on. Any repeater owner on a high site that's got a repeater where they're, you're on a DNR site, US Forest Service, etc. It's a pretty bleak situation because the cost of paying the monthly or annual lease for the floor space has gone up order of magnitude or more. So, like I say, the last gentleman commenting on usage, the other thing out there is that for high broad coverage machines. And I think that one of the things I've seen is repeaters have become so inexpensive, like a fusion repeater. You can buy them for nothing, put them on FM, but a lot of them that I'm retired from the FCC. I was a field agent. I'll tell you what, I ran into a lot of repeaters that were, guys spent whatever, I think it was $100 or $200 to buy a new fusion repeater. They stuck them in their garage, and we'd get an interference complaint. I'd go out there and I'd talk to them, and the guy said, "Yeah, well, I'm just testing it in my neighborhood." There's a lot of those that are of that ilk, So
well, it's interesting that
about usage,
right. Despite the costs, we're still getting new applications, right? So that I don't.
Well, yeah, but where are they going? Are they going up on Tiger at 3,000 feet, where it's going to cost you $5,000 a year to pay for the floor space?
I feel like we've gone off topic from the presentation.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm just talking about the whole idea of narrow banding, and the gentleman brought up narrow band, but what about overall traffic? And I can tell you too, from FCC standpoint, but I'm retired now, but we monitored 144 to 148, and all modes of modulation, broadband equipment. I can tell you, looking 10 years ago, the amount of transmissions on 144 to 148, it has gone down substantially.
Yeah. So the question here, sorry.
Anyway, yeah.
I'm
just talking about usage. But
so to the point, right? The WWARA's mission is not to restrict the deployment. They're trying to increase the capabilities. So if 4 guys want an amateur repeater, they can't get one right now. It doesn't matter if the 4 guys have one or don't. It doesn't matter if there's already one only being used by 2. The point is, WWARA is trying to make an equitable use of the entire spectrum. So again,
yeah, no, that's fine.
but it's not, because there's chime in here that's outside of scope of the presentation for narrowbanding. So utilization is not the question here. It's about the technical feasibility of adding additional spectrum so the WWARA can see to it that 3 guys can have a repeater if they want one. So thank you,
Yes.
Scott. If we could please, others of us have things to do today.
Go
Yeah.
good.
So, so this is kind of what we're proposing, is that we're going to migrate to this
You know,
plan that you can.
yeah.
Um,
What about that though? Is
I don't, I'm hearing a bunch of random noise here.
no.
All right.
They,
We're gonna
mute Larry.
Yeah. So this is where it all boils down to right here. This is kind of what we're going to propose. We're going to vote on this. Members are going to vote on this at the next meeting. That's our plan anyway. We want to get it out here as broadly as possible so people are aware what we're talking about. It's going to mean some chaos for people programming their own personal radios, because these things are going to convert as people have time and resources. So I would point you to the WWARA website, where we have all of the channels available, like all of the current coordinated systems available in their current modes. So you can dump them in a radio that gets updated nightly. So we can provide the most current data to you. But I don't think any new change, transition, blah, blah, blah is going to be easy. We looked at a bunch of different options. There really aren't, there aren't significantly better options. They're all just converting the whole chunk as people have time. We looked at doing a chunk, an individual piece of spectrum. The problem was the time for that's really passed, because you're just forcing a change on someone when they're not necessarily ready. So we can't necessarily convert. We can't just say this 100 kilohertz is going to convert right now. That's not fair to those users. It's really more fair to just let people convert. Here's the plan. Here's the timeline. Convert when you can. The first step will be to go to narrowband in place. Once we get 2 adjacent users that are narrowband in place, we can migrate them into their narrowband slots. And we'll update that information on our website as soon as it's legit. I think that's the best we can offer. Did anybody have any questions, comments? I think after this, it's really just, I have some more resources for you here. There's some contact information. There's our next meeting on December 7th. What else did I have? Oh yeah, and there's our resources page. Thanks, Jonathan.
So Scott, what are you guys looking at for, like, for those of us that can comply, when would you like us to comply?
I would say as soon as possible, as soon as practical. I'm trying to decide whether I should put which one of these slides I should put up, but there's the timeline, and the sooner we can get people moved, as Rob mentioned, we can't move people until people start moving, right? Because there's no free spectrum to move people into. I did make a little chart, which I didn't include in the diagram because it wasn't very pretty. I just did it for myself to kind of see what spectrum is available. And like today on 2 meters, 70 centimeters isn't too bad. That's fine. But on 2 meters, it's we're not ready to move anybody. We really do need to get 2 meter machines kind of sliding and moving so we can start making some channels.
Couple of hands up.
Yeah, sorry.
Where I'm trying to figure out where we're looking here. Yes, that answer that. John, how about you?
Okay, it would be nice if a few of the folks who go to narrowband document how they managed it, especially the cans if they need retuning, how they did that. So,
Well, it's going to depend a lot on the repeater system that they have. If it's a modern repeater, they literally just change the mode to narrowband.
okay.
And the cans, you don't have to move very far. But ideally the cans would need to be peaked up a little bit because you're going to slide a little bit again on 2 meters.
Okay. We're on
70
440.
centimeters. What's that?
we're on 440 right now, so
Yeah, so if you're on 70 centimeters, you don't have to move at all. You just
Okay.
change the mode to narrow,
Okay.
and you don't even have to move, because that will create space next to you, so we inherently get another slot.
Okay,
Well, again, as soon as someone else changes, but
sounds great. We have older equipment, so we'll have to replace, but that's okay.
yeah, and that's why, we want to make sure everybody has enough time. Again, if you have an older system, it probably, we're talking about 10 years from now, it was kind of when everybody has to be narrowband. Over the next 10 years, it's not too difficult to put together a little bit of a budget to buy a new system, because your current system was going to be 10 years older. It may not make it that far anyway. So,
Hey, Scott, this is Larry. I just wanted to point out, we at the board have talked about having some folks, when we start seeing some move here, folks who may need some technical assistance with making some adjustments to duplexers and other things, of identifying some folks who throughout the western state of Washington to be able to help folks make these moves if they don't have the technical skills to adjust duplexers and stuff. And so we in the board have been really having conversations about how we can help support that effort, and maybe identify some technical folks who'd be willing to help folks with some of these moves as we go forward with this process. So that is something I know that we've been talking about. Just wanted to point that out here, Scott.
yes, thank you, Larry. That's a good point. So if you do need assistance with your system, I would encourage you to reach out to the membership or reach out to the board directly, and we'll see if we can pair you up with somebody that can offer assistance, technical assistance. Bob, looked like you had your hand up there. Or no?
Which Bob?
Bob Amos?
There I go. Okay, now I'm unmuted. Thanks for taking it. Yeah, being around the WWARA back in the days when the change to 20 kilohertz spacing was going, and there was some people who wanted 15, and it was a lot of fun. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that as we talk about this, I know there's a lot, this is just kind of going in process now, but education is a lot, as I agree with some of the guys who've already spoke, because I put a D-Star repeater up 12.5 kilohertz away from the output of the FM repeater that's up on East Tiger Mountain. And it all works great, except for the guys, even the newer radios, the front ends are wide, and they got kind of upset because the D-Star, it's just a digital mode. You hear nothing. It sounds like a modem stuck on a radio, but they don't understand. And I got quite a few that were complaining because they didn't understand why they're hearing that noise. Of course, they're underneath the repeater, maybe 10, 15 miles away from the transmitter. And my point is, I'm just trying to say that as this goes on, clubs should take a note of this. People who have repeaters should take a note of this, that even though the receivers are new, that doesn't mean they're going to be really narrow as far as the receiver is concerned. So they might have to kind of push to make sure their constituents understand that they'll have to use probably PL, CTCSS or something, because their receiver may pick up the nearby narrow-banded repeater that was put next to them. That's all.
Thanks. Yeah, we require CTCSS tones, at least on the inputs already, right? So we started collecting information about tones on the outputs, and the vast majority of current systems actually have tones on their outputs as well. So that is a good recommendation to also program, the decode tone as well.
Yeah, the point being is that the user has to understand they have to go to the decode mode.
Right. Yeah, I don't know how to necessarily get that out there, but there is on our website, there's a document on kind of using tones and their value that we put together to kind of explain that. People have to read it though, of course, right? Just like the manual.
Yeah, that's right. All right.
Well, thank you.
For your work, guys.
Yeah. Rob, you had a thing?
Take mine last.
Okay. Doug?
Yeah, thanks. Here in the Seattle area, we have a pretty complex set of repeaters, and we found that building up code plug files and stuff has been really helpful for getting people upgraded quickly and easily. across fairly large populations of folks, and that's been adopted by some other groups. So in some cases, our exact code plugs, because they're kind of regional in nature, and we would certainly continue to do that and see that as a vehicle for helping people get upgraded. We often have programming parties where those of us who have more of the equipment and experience will help others get their equipment upgraded, and I think those are often a good activity tacked on the end of a monthly meeting or something of that sort. So I think those are some tools that can be used, and we've used those for the normal evolution of changes that have happened in the region, which we basically had to do upgrades about every year anyway. So
right. Doug, someone is asking where to get those code plugs.
So the Seattle DMR website, seattledmr.org, has the code plugs that Seattle ACS has put together, and it also includes DMR. Seattle ACS has internally has a set of things that we can, with this upcoming conversion, that we'll probably try and make more widely available on the public side of that website. Don't think it's currently on the public side, but we can check. But certainly there's good reason to make those more widely available.
Excellent. Rob, it looks like you're up.
Okay, so a quick note on the practicality in the narrow banding side, particularly with coordinating here. As we've mentioned, and this is specifically for 2 meters, anyone will take the existing situation. Somebody wants to put a new 2-meter wideband on today. We'll call it in Seattle just for sake of argument. And there's already one on that frequency in North and South Sound. And right now we require that new trustee to get a co-channel agreement with the 2 existing people on the frequency. Narrow banding is going to cause this to increase exponentially. Today, they only need 2 co-channel agreements. If there are 3 people on the adjacent frequency that now this new narrow band is going to move into, we're going to require 5 co-channel agreements. So you can see where this is going to go. So the reason I bring this up, there was a question of, how soon would you like us to go? Well, the reality is it's going to be in everyone's interest to go as soon as possible and not be waiting out till 2035, because then the longer we are sitting in mixed mode, wide and narrow, the longer it is going to be harder for people to put new and even renew old ones into narrowband space because of the increased agreement. Right now, we have difficulty processing coordinations because of lack of response from people oftentimes, and a host of other issues. I had an email that I sent this morning to a trustee on this. WWARA has had turnover. We've had other issues that have caused things to take longer than they need to. Needing a lot more co-channel letters and waiting on other repeater owners to get to test. The testing process, everyone's going to need to go through a testing process again, and you're going to need more co-channel letters. So the longer we take to do this, the longer it's going to affect a lot more people. So anyhow, I think you get the gist of it. I'll stop there.
He's trying to make trouble. I get it.
Do it. Do it. Just do it.
Right? Yes. Doug?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's an argument to be made for at least for some of sites to do a 2-phase change. One, shrink to narrow in place wherever they are. The more people that do that, the more likelihood we free up slots. And then a second phase, once there's empty slots, people start shifting.
That'll have to be the mechanism, right? Because if they shrink in place, they're ready to go. They're ready to go. And then once we get 2 adjacent users that are ready, then we can shift them. Oops, are you mute? I think you muted, or if you're still there. Doug?
So, yeah, I don't think we've actually said this explicitly, but I think that's something we may want to be actually recommend. And it's a little bit more work. The first pass of work is just switching to narrowband and doesn't require any changes to tuned cavities or frequencies. It's just changing the output mode, the emission mode from wide to narrow. The next phase for some people will be more complicated because there won't be a mode change, but there will be a frequency change, which means touching the receiver and transmitter, and probably in some cases tuning up cavities that are associated with those things.
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
By the way,
Fortunately,
one
there's
other thing on tones. I tend to recommend people use tones. There are parts of Seattle where there's just interference, period, on 2 meters and in some 440 frequencies, where I use tone on the receive just because some welding shop or whatever, the top end of the Ballard Bridge is really bad for interference on a number of frequencies. So, and I don't know what they're doing there, but there's something going on. I think there's a welding shop or something. At any rate, so there's good reason to use tone in any case.
Right on. All right. Kenny, it looked like you had a comment.
I just wanted to share some of the stuff that's been going on in the chat because people haven't seen it. The 2 big themes is we have to do more education, a lot for the users so that they know what's going on. And the other one is getting the source of where to get repeater information to start publishing and doing this type of information. So, ours is there. Repeater book is always been challenging to get them to make any updates. So I'll certainly be happy to reach out to the gentleman that runs it again. And the other thing I want to add is that Scott and I have talked about writing an article for QST to share our journey on this and where we're going, assuming that this gets accepted. So that's another avenue where we'll help with the education of it. And yes, I just signed Scott up for work. So there we go.
Sure. I got lots of free time. Yeah.
I heard that bus. Wah, wah.
Right on.
Hey, so curious question for you, Scott. Jamie here again.
Yes.
Since your hope is to be dead when they talk about ultra narrow band, would it not make sense to try to plan for that? Spare some pairs, move some folks. That's a question.
Well, so we actually have, is it just one? We have 1 pair now, Kenny, or 2? I forgot to look at the band plan. Ultra narrowband pairs on 2 meters.
Yeah, sorry. There's technically 2, although one of them is not usable because it overlaps with the crosslink.
SFP.
No, with the crosslink.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
yeah.
I thought we stopped using one. Yes.
So we stopped
correct.
using one of them.
Yeah. So you have 1 ultra narrowband pair that literally has to be, the trick is it really is only 6 1/4, well, whatever, 7, a few kilohertz wide, right? So it can't be, there's no equivalent. It has to literally be ultra narrowband. So there are D-Star systems in there now, for example. But that's a good question. I think there's still a number of questions for us to work through on the back end where we've got some edge cases and things that we need to resolve. The biggest thing for us now is to get this timeline accepted and socialized so that people start thinking about, don't fix that crappy old repeater. It's just time to replace it with one that can be narrowband, because there's a timeline and that is an interesting thought. We could certainly, I tried to get this done, admittedly, to start setting aside some spectrum to make this a little easier for us in 70 centimeters some time ago. We had like 300 kilohertz with no repeat. Well, I think we had one repeater in like 300 kilohertz. And it seemed like a fantastic time to just say, hey, let's narrowband that. And then we could put those guys in there and have kind of an orderly transition. And I'm afraid I was voted down. So now we have this, where kind of it's a little bit of a free for all, unfortunately. And again, it's really unfortunate for Rob.
Yeah, I feel the pain. So I guess one of the things that's in my mind is so setting silly users aside from the impact, right? It's so the repeater owners and operators, what their, I'm going to use the word resistance would be to narrowbanding would be. So let's say it has nothing to do with the repeater itself. Maybe it's the retuning of cans. If the WWARA had a group of folks that could dedicate a Saturday that just hop from repeater site to repeater site to repeater site to aid those operators in retuning their cans, maybe worthy of a thing with anyway. And then outside of that too, having some commercial background interest, I might be able to find some, we'll call them vendors that could supply new equipment at we'll call it a reasonable discount. Right.
Absolutely.
So that when you trip into, hey, my WWRA old ass 6000 that's 40 years old isn't, that's not a thing anymore. What do I upgrade to and what's the easiest path forward? So I'm giving people options to upgrading to new equipment that isn't super complex. That's reasonably priced. I mean, the Fusion repeater is an example of that. They're not $200 anymore, but and then they used to be way more flexible than they are now, Gen 2s. But anyway, happy to help with that if you guys want it.
I'm gonna reach out to you. Thank you. Doug?
Yeah, I think I can take the credit or take the role of being the person with the on this call with the most complex problem to solve. Not only do I have a large user base, but I have a very complex 6-site, that's 6 receiver transmitters or receiver onlys, all with cavities in the Puget Sound area. It's a daunting conversion to look at on both the user side and the repeater side. And doing it at one time is going to have to be a tightly coordinated activity just because of the breadth of systems and mountaintops and other things that need to be touched in quick succession to restore the system to full functionality. I'm certainly making those concerns very clear to the board as they know.
Yes, he has been.
And we've also shared that we're giving you 10 years to plan and to execute this.
Doug has said very clearly he will not be the first one.
Yeah, so
right.
As an example with KCARC's adoption of the WWRA equipment, we purchased a new repeater for the 2-meter pair, which will be narrowband capable. Rob, you've got some emails and some direct messages in your box there. We would be happy. This makes the most sense and the best time if you want us to migrate into narrowband. Happy to do it. So
I did see those hit, and I appreciate it. We'll definitely the sooner we can have some folks start doing it earlier, it will definitely help. The other key piece for people to realize is, as we have somebody go narrowband, that's not going to automatically mean that the adjacent channel is now a free for all. So that's something that the board is going to have to figure out how we manage, and it needs to be somewhat controlled in the release of those newly created channels so that we don't create more problems and have people get upset because they, you know, there's 3 deep trying to jump on one new channel kind of thing.
You can send those to me. I'll take care of feelings. Thank you guys
All
for
right.
your effort. It's been a long time coming. I appreciate your guys' willingness to do this. Equity in repeater pairs has been a huge thorn in my side because I've seen some larger groups that suck up a bunch of frequencies for a mission that they're trying to do. And, you know, there's been discussion of utilization of said resources, and I feel all of those same pains. So this is great. One good way of trying to mitigate that concern. So nice work to the team.
Thank you.